All right. Hi, everybody. Now, nationalism. I'll try to keep this concise. Um, with nationalism, there's like three major components to this concept, which really, I guess, is like really reaches its height, you'd say, in the kind of the modern era. So, what nationalism contains, first of all, it starts with the Enlightenment. All right, and then it goes through. You really see it spike in the revolutions, the Atlantic revolutions. So those are two parts to it, and it doesn't just end in the modern era by any means, but it really gets its start here with the Enlightenment and the Atlantic revolutions. And as you see, and it goes all the way through like after World War II. But this is where nationalism gets its roots. So nationalism, remember, is defined as like intense pride in your nation and thinking your nation is better than everyone else's, right? It starts with the idea of the Enlightenment. All right, so remember what the Enlightenment is, and I don't have all the terms on the screen here, but the Enlightenment is a movement started by philosophers like Voltaire and John Locke and Montesquieu and Rousseau. It starts in Europe, and it builds off the previous intellectual movements of the Protestant Reformation and the Scientific Revolution. People start to think, like, uh, reason and logic should dictate kind of how decisions are made and should dictate how government is run. Um, People start to believe in like we all have natural rights of life, liberty, and property, and popular sovereignty, social contract, where the governments are supposed to do what they're supposed to do is protect people's natural rights. People feel like they should have a representative government that they have a say in, and they should agree or consent to being governed. Those are all Enlightenment ideals. And the Enlightenment is a major turning point because it is literally the foundation for almost every country in the world's government, with the exception of certain areas of the world. But any Western government, the idea of democracy is kind of like the most greatly accepted form of government today. And it all kind of stems from the Enlightenment. So, with the Enlightenment, um, you have those ideas of natural rights, etc., social contracts, popular sovereignty, life, liberty, property. Um, that was a big departure from the time, which we saw, like, especially in Europe, you had the ideas of divine right theory and absolutism, where monarchs pretty much felt like they could rule with religious justification. And essentially, like, that lasted a long time, but when the Enlightenment starts, they start to question that. People start to say that's not good enough. And applying reason and logic and these ideals, other ideals, people start to say, you know what, these governments aren't working anymore. We need new government. So those lead to the Atlantic revolutions. All right, and so it starts with the American Revolution, who want to be free from British rule. And King George of England continues to raise taxes and without giving the Americans any representation in the British Parliament or government. And so that's where you hear the phrase no taxation without representation. So the people in the Americas were like, well, we're a British colony, we should have some representation, and they did not. So they felt all the new taxes, like the Stamp Act and all those kind of things, were unfair. So they launched a revolution based on these Enlightenment ideals, and they crafted the Declaration of Independence in 1776, which started the American Revolution. The French and the British had developed a rivalry at this time, and so the French saw this revolt against the British and wanted to help out the Americans. So they sent money and soldiers to help out the Americans fight the British. Well, what that did is that takes the French government and puts them in great debt. And so King Louis XVI and other kings even before him started raising taxes on people of the third estate in France. Remember, France's social structure is dictated by an estates system. They have three estates. You know, the first estate made up of pretty much all clergy members who own most of the land and have a great amount of the wealth. And then there is a second estate, which are just nobles, another wealthy landowning class. And then you have pretty much a third estate of everyone else, 97% of the population living in about 10% of the land in France or something like that. So it's highly unfair, and those people are paying most of the taxes. So there is everyone from really poor peasants to pretty middle class, like doctors, accountants, teachers, in the third estate. So third estate launches a revolt against the French monarchy in France and overthrows the king, ultimately beheads the king. The French Revolution is a long, bloody battle. There is a period of time where you have the Reign of Terror, which is where a time of paranoia in France, where everyone kind of thinks that there is another, everyone's an enemy of the government, and everyone's an enemy of the revolution, and a lot of people are beheaded because of that suspicion. So, more to the point, though, the French Revolution garners stirs up a lot of nationalist feelings, because as the French kind of separate themselves from the rule of the monarchy, they start to really identify as a nation instead of part of an empire. So they feel very uniquely French, and that stirs up a lot of nationalist fervor among French people, because a lot of other foreign powers don't like the unrest that's happening in France, and they come other countries like Prussia, for example. They try to come to France and stop the revolution, and the French take that as like, oh, us against the world kind of thing, and nationalism really rises there. Later, when Napoleon takes over in France, he also tries to expand France back into an empire. He does a lot of things that kind of are counter to the original goals of the French Revolution, but basically, when he tries to conquer much of Europe, that stirs up nationalist feelings in other European countries who are saying, oh, we're going to rise together and band as a nation to oppose Napoleon. So the French Revolution really is where nationalism first spikes, but it is all rooted in the Enlightenment ideals in the first place. So other revolutions, though, are in Haiti and in France. The Haitian Revolution is a successful slave revolt. It was a French colony, if you remember. But when they get wind of the American and the French revolutions, they quickly, the Enlightenment ideals quickly take hold in Haiti, and they stage their own revolution. Haiti was the first place in the Americas to be established by blacks. And then in Latin America, after the Haitian Revolution, and throughout South America and Central America and Mexico, there's several revolts against the Spanish rule. So the Spanish Empire crumbles really due to these revolutions, due to this Enlightenment ideals and this sense of nationalism that's manifesting in these revolutions. The Latin American revolutions are led by someone named Simon Bolivar. He's like the Latin American George Washington, and the Enlightenment ideals are he believes strongly in them and uses that to justify his many revolutions he leads. He mostly leads revolutions in Colombia, Panama, Venezuela. There are several documents you should know about that relate to nationalism. So there are the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, which is written by the French Third Estate. Then there's the Jamaica Letter written by Bolivar. So the Enlightenment ideals do not only spread nationalism, but they have other sense of freedom that goes to other aspects of society. So Enlightenment ideals influence many people to challenge existing social relationships. So things like women's rights and women's suffrage, which is women's right to vote. There's a women's rights movement, which is kind of coined in the seminal moment of that movement by the Seneca Falls Convention in Seneca Falls, New York of 1848. And then there's also abolitionist movements that begin in Europe and in the United States, which is the opposition of slavery. So right now I just want you to pause the video and think of the following question. What is nationalism on its as conceptual level? Where does nationalism get started? What is nationalism? So pause and answer that. And then think about, let's solve this question. Why is the Enlightenment a turning point? Think about that. Write a CCOT assertion using the Enlightenment. Why is that a turning point? Okay. Additional things to know about in terms of nationalism. Throughout the 1800s, you'll see there's a new ideal. I've mentioned the nation state a few times, but a nation is where people form together based on a common language, religion, social customs, ethnicity, similar government style, a national boundary. And you see actual nations form. France, for example, is one, especially in Europe. Germany forms in the 1800s. Italy forms in the 1800s. Even Argentina becomes its own nation in the 1800s. Okay. So there are some other challenges to like centralized governments. So throughout the world, and nationalism doesn't just exist in the Americas and the Atlantic world. Nationalism also, there are displays of this even in Asia. So the Qing dynasty was challenged by several rebellions as the Qing were seen as weakening. Remember they didn't industrialize, and Europe influence was creeping in to China, and so there was some internal rebellion against the Qing from the Taiping revolt. Okay, so there's that there. You also have other examples of slave resistance. I just want you to come back to. Throughout North America, there's many slave revolts, in the southern United States. So that also is a form of nationalism. There's other forms of nationalism that you should know about. In China, there's sorry for skipping back and forth, by the way. There's also the Boxer Rebellion in China. So you have the Taiping Rebellion and the Boxer Rebellion in China in the modern era, which are challenges to the Qing government by Chinese people, because they're displeased with how the Qing were ruling. The 100 Days Reforms and let me go back real quick just to clarify. Oops. So the 100 Days Reforms and the Self-Strengthening Movement, sorry about that, guys, are examples of how the Chinese were trying to modernize to resist British rule. But the Taiping Rebellion and the Boxer Rebellion are revolts by like native Chinese people against the Qing. And there's also like religion is a way of using of showing nationalism, in that some religious rituals are used to oppose foreign rule or like imperialism. So one, if you remember the ghost dance, we talked about this. I showed you a quick video. There's something called the ghost dance used by Native Americans in response to United States government imperialism. And there's also the Xhosa cattle killing movement in southern Africa. Basically, these Xhosa people, which is Xhosa, they believe that if they killed all the cattle, the white Europeans would be leaving their African lands. That was their justification. So, what I want you to do now is just pause the video and think to yourself and answer the question, how did nationalism influence people to resist imperialism? I gave you a few examples. What are they? Pause it and answer the question. All right, and lastly, you want to know again that the Enlightenment rule also influences people like Mary Wollstonecraft and Olympia de Gouges to advocate for women's rights and also abolition movements.